I would like to read my favorite quote from SHATTER ME series. Oh, I know what it is. Leave your hips for me, love. I honestly think that quote is pretty overrated. I like this one better. His fingers grease the hem of my top and he says, I want this up. He tugs on the waist of my pants and says, I want this down. Ew. Imagine I'm Warner. Ew. Make believe. Actually, I don't really understand the fuss about any of this. Then why did you read 3 books? And the novellas too. That leads to the quote by my only favorite character, Kenji. I thought you said it was disgusting. He levels a look at me. Yes, but I'm a sad, sad man with very low standards. Why am I such a whore? I'm a whore! A whore! I'm a whore! Remember when I said I didn't have Shatter Me? Also, remember the notes in the video where I confessed that I had finished reading it by the time I was done editing? Well, I also read 2 more books and 2 novellas. Let us begin. As you already know, Juliet is a mutant girl living in a post-apocalypse dystopian world in a section which used to be called North America. The government wanted to get rid of her for her strange lethal powers, but one of their own, Warner, proposed a plan where they could harness her powers for their own benefit, to suppress the uprisings. Adam Kent, an old classmate of Juliet's, help her escape, and somehow they end up at a compound where other mutant rebels have taken shelter for decades, waiting for their plan to unfold and take back their country from usurping powers that were supposed to end their suffering, not multiply them, not using them to roll over them. I believe that's as spoiler-free I can be about the trilogy, or rather the first half of the series. The novella that comes before the second book is a transition between the 2 books, but from the POV of the so-called villain. In the first book, he's portrayed as a mad, evil man, and somehow being in his head is a far more peaceful experience than being in the protagonist's. It was rather impossible to not notice a drastic difference between what Juliet had described Warner to be and what he was in his own head. Somehow, not only he wasn't the bloodthirsty monster who feasted on the suffering of the people he ruled over, he also cared deeply about them, to the degree that he went to the civilians door to door to ask them about their living condition. Don't be surprised to hear he was never undercover. Anyway, don't you wonder what kind of answers the civilians were comfortable giving him? I said, anyway. Because if you thought that change was drastic, sweet little pie, you're in no way ready for the kind of changes the 2 love interests go through to their very bone marrow. Where was consistency, you might ask? It flew out the window in the second book. Or maybe my cocodials ate it. In summary, because it was a long time ago that I read them, less than 2 months ago. And even if I wanted to, I wouldn't be able to get into all the details. The first boyfriend becomes over-controlling. He takes gaslighting to the next level, which nearly costs his own life. Not to mention that despite being surrounded by mutants, she's still very distinct, and everybody acts very cautiously when being around her. And when it comes to her powers, so is Kent. On the other hand, Warner understands her. Warner, who only pretended that he wanted to use her powers for his own good. And the constant evil gleam in his eyes Juliet observed was the wrong bend of light, a mirage. But at the same time, morality doesn't allow Juliet to accept the chemistry she has with him. Thus the love triangle. While we are recording this, he's basically eating away my broom. Now he's pretending that nothing was happening. There was one part in Ignite Me where Juliet made a huge discovery about her powers and was like, I'm not gonna be with anyone because I have to. To which I moaned and yet was very satisfied as I realized she was finally going to make the right choice. Herself, right? Right? Or was she? Because she ran toward the exact same love interest to declare her feelings. To be honest, I had been waiting for the promised spice in this book, since my only favorite part in the previous books was the exact same thing. But the only thing I could do while reading this one was cringe. They made love for the first time right after his only living family member had died. Not to mention, it was over too quickly and subtly to compare with what happened in Unravel Me, which had a longer dirty talk. The only positive thing I can say about it is a shorter scene that follows a little while after that. Tyler Murphy should definitely write new adult novels. Ew. Not that the term YA has stopped anyone from writing hot sex scenes. Not in this day and age, anyway. Forget about the love dynamic and let us talk about other characters and the plot. First of all, and most important of all, I need to mention that whatever many stars I've rated each one of these books, one of them was always dedicated to Kenji, this masterpiece. Okay, now my praise is over. What stood out the most to me was Castle, the leader of the rebels, who had been into the job for a few decades and still didn't have the material. He made such emotional decisions and took so many unnecessary risks that I was truly shocked that it took Juliet nearly 3 books to realize that he was too soft to lead them to victory. About the war and the fights, I didn't read most of them. Honestly, I couldn't bring myself to care about the details, only the outcome. And the main reason I was still reading was due to the memes about Warner and how people were so in love with him. Honestly, I didn't mean for this video to become a sort of rant. If you know me, as I've said before, I started this series hoping for it to become an all-time favorite so I could yell at everyone until I was sure that everyone had read it. I didn't even feel like reading these books because most of them, especially Unravel Me, the second book, felt like really fresh drafts. Most of the dialogues needed a thorough editing, especially book 2 plus, and 2 of the main characters weren't even consistent. I'm not saying that the change Adam Kent went through is sort of impossible, but the sort of morality that the author was trying to pose here, it could have been done in a better paced process, maybe not by villainizing one to make hero the other. And Aaron Warner's character wasn't that well done. I mean, things could have changed to make us actually see the transition. No, we just saw an evil man in the first book and someone who was so different in the third. The novella was actually more consistent to what he truly was and felt like and thought. It's sort of heartbreaking to see that many authors have later taken elements of this series and turned them into stories that are seen by the readers as unique. Everything in this series could have been done better. The potential was there. Maybe if it wasn't that rushed. I've actually heard some authors saying that their second book always sucked because, after having all the time in the world to edit and perfect their first book, still this first wasn't perfect, but anyway, they suddenly find themselves in tours and busy with interviews and marketing and all this stuff, and it takes them a while to get used to deadlines and stuff, so it's understandable that the second book was kind of the worst. But that doesn't excuse the editors. Ignite Me ended with a sort of acknowledgement that authors make when they want to wrap up their series. Which was where I realized that this series was firstly supposed to be a trilogy. Which didn't make sense. I truly would have been disappointed in life itself if the guys behind publishing Ignite Me had thought that that ending, which left everything on unstable grounds, was any sort of conclusion to a freaking dystopian. Out of habit, or let's be honest, self-loathing, I continued reading 2 more chapters of the next book. By the law of math, statistics, and probability, this book has to be better. In the third book, they managed to take over the North America within 2 chapters. Somehow none of the districts rebelled against the new ruler. By the way, who would be the new ruler, you might think? Aaron Warner, who had been trained his whole life for the position? Castle, who had managed to hide an army of mutants from the side of the Supreme Commander for decades? The $1 million question. Who is the perfect new ruler for this continent that is sure to go through chaos? Anyway, Tyler Murphy is a talented author. A very large expanse of series proof of that. Writing stories that are set in different worlds is way more complicated than writing contemporary. Anyone who has ever attempted at something like that would know. These past 2 years, I've read so many disappointing books, and mostly due to the hype, or else I wouldn't have continued reading. What has been your most disappointing read? If you enjoyed my opinion, the review, the sketches, my birds occasionally screaming at the camera, or even my heavenly face, make sure to subscribe for more bookish movie content and occasionally the cultural side of them. On the other hand, if you didn't like any of the above, unsubscribe right now. Because YouTube algorithm is not that YouTube algorithm is not that keen on ghost subscribers. Yeah, but okay. Thank you. Have a non-torturous read. I'm Shahrzad and thank you so much for watching this episode on Shahrzad Stories channel. See ya. Not to mention that she's still very distinct despite being among the mutants and they...